You're watching Scriptease. In today's episode, we'll be exploring suspense by looking at Jojo's bizarre adventure. You can expect spoilers for all of Part 4, mature language, and partial nudity. Last time on What Would Jojos Do, we spoke about introducing your story. Assuming you've got them hooked, how do you keep them around? How do you keep them engaged with your story? If you want them to be constantly looking forward to the next moment, then you need the promise of a moment worth looking forward to. Let's call this promise suspense. There are a lot of definitions of suspense that get bandied around, but the most prominent ones come from the Master of Suspense himself, Alfred Hitchcock. Director of some of the greatest thrillers of all time, notably North by Northwest, Rear Window, and Psycho, Hitchcock used a perfect combination of storytelling and cinematic technique to keep his audience on the edge of their seats. Araki himself points to the book Hitchcock by Francois Truffaut as a map which he follows when creating his stories. In the book, Hitchcock makes a number of assertions about suspense. Firstly, Hitchcock makes a point of separating suspense from fear. He gives the example of a switchboard operator listening in on a conversation between a man and a woman. The man wants the woman to marry him, but the woman is hesitant to accept his proposal. Hitchcock keeps the camera focused on the switchboard operator as she listens in on the would-be couple's conversation, showing her suspense as she awaits the woman's response. The switchboard operator isn't scared of the response, it's not like there's a threat to anyone's life, but she remains full of suspense nonetheless. For a more modern example, think about the end of The Truman Show, when Truman is standing at the exit from New Haven. Sylvia and the rest of the public at home are filled with suspense that is only relieved when Truman takes his final step out of the ecosphere. Secondly, Hitchcock establishes that suspense is not entirely dependent upon our love for the characters involved. In most suspense moments, we care for the character whose well-being is at stake, like in Halloween, when Laurie Strode is hiding from Michael Myers in the closet. But this isn't at all necessary, as Hitchcock illustrates with the following example. A curious person goes into somebody else's room and begins to search through the drawers. Now you show the person who lives in that room coming up the stairs. Then you go back to the person who is searching, and the public feels like warning him. Be careful, watch out, someone's coming up the stairs. Someone snooping through another person's stuff isn't a likable quality by any means, but we still get tense thinking that he might be caught. A modern example would be in Game of Thrones Season 6, when Ramsay Bolton is tied up and Sansa is about to unleash his hounds upon him, or when Lancel Lannister is crawling towards the lit candles, trying to extinguish them before they spark off the wildfire. Lastly, and most famously, Hitchcock distinguishes between the ideas of suspense and surprise, using the example of a conversation in which two people have no idea there is a timed bomb planted underneath the table. In this example, we have two scenarios. In the first scenario, the audience has no idea the bomb is there. The bomb suddenly explodes with absolutely no warning. In the second scenario, the audience is shown the bomb, but the people chatting still have no idea. The scene plays out with the bomb ticking down until, boom, it explodes. Hitchcock's point is thus: in the first case, we have given the public 15 seconds of surprise at the moment of the explosion. In the second, we have provided them with 15 minutes of suspense. This example is the origin of Hitchcock's famous quote, "There is no terror in the bang, only in the anticipation of it." For a modern example, think of Breaking Bad Season 3. Hank receives an anonymous warning that he'll be attacked by two men in 1 minute. That next minute plays out in real time, and we the audience are held in complete suspense. Hitchcock closes with this conclusion: whenever possible, the public must be informed. That is to say that suspense arises when the audience has information which hints at a future event, whether the characters in the film know it or not. This lies in contrast to mystery, where the very fact that the audience lacks knowledge is pivotal to the intrigue of the story. As Hitchcock puts it, mystery is seldom suspenseful. The whodunit generates the kind of curiosity that is void of emotion, and emotion is an essential ingredient of suspense. For me, the 2013 film Prisoners is a perfect example of this idea. I loved the film, and I loved its ending, but the very fact that the culprit was left ambiguous took away the suspense and instead left me trying to guess the end of the film. I personally like Truffaut's definition the most, as it's the easiest to get a handle on. Suspense is the stretching out of an anticipation. That word anticipation is integral. The audience cannot anticipate something which they have no knowledge of. Araki's love of Hitchcock's style pervades his work, from his handsome villains to his use of famous landmarks as key set pieces, and, of course, the many, many scary staircases. Needless to say, Araki uses suspense throughout JoJo's to keep us engaged. Now that we've discussed what suspense is and how it can be created, let's see how Araki weaves suspense through JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Diamond is Unbreakable. First off, let's make this clear. Although the main plot of Diamond is Unbreakable is catching a serial killer, it's not a mystery show by any means. As stated earlier, the difference between suspense and mystery lies with the amount of knowledge the audience has. In episode 17, when we first explicitly learn about the serial killer in Morio, the audience learns his identity at the end of the very same episode. Even after Kira changes his identity, the audience once again learns his identity in the very next episode. Diamond is Unbreakable is never a whodunit or mystery thriller. Araki always lets us know where the danger is, keeping us one step ahead of the characters. But while Araki's depiction of Kira may lack mystery, it's chock full of suspense. In episode 21, the first time we truly meet Kira, the audience is actually placed in his shoes. After Shigechi accidentally takes the severed hand of one of Kira's victims, Kira is forced to pursue him and attempt to stealthily retrieve the hand, hiding in a tobibako right next to Josuke, Okuyasu, and Shigechi. The problem is Kira's and the stakes are Kira's. If he fails, his quiet life will be disturbed. By any rational means, we should want them to find him, but something in the viewer desperately wants him to avoid detection. As Hitchcock says, the apprehension of the bomb is more powerful than the feelings of sympathy or dislike for the characters involved. In this case, the apprehension of Kira being discovered is more powerful than our moral rejection of serial killers. So how is this suspense created? A suspense-filled sequence typically follows 4 stages: creating suspense, building suspense, breaking suspense, and cathartic release. In this case, suspense is created when Shigechi accidentally takes the severed hand. Via narration, Kira explains the consequences if the hand is discovered. This establishes the stakes for the following sequence and gets us emotionally invested. This suspense builds as Kira tails Shigechi, enters the gym's equipment room, hides underneath the tobibako from Josuke and Okuyasu, and then fails to retrieve the bag with the coat hanger. He grows closer and closer to being found out, ratcheting up the tension. The suspense is broken when, just before Kira is discovered by Shigechi's harvest, the gym teacher finds the 3 boys and scares them off. Finally, we have cathartic release, as Kira is shown outside the equipment room and provides a monologue about being guided by Lady Luck, believing himself to have escaped detection. Now in this particular case, Araki then subverts that expectation by now having Shigechi find Kira anyway, suddenly dropping him back into peril. But the 4 steps remain: creating suspense, building suspense, breaking suspense, and cathartic release. Let's see these steps in practice during a very different scene from Diamond is Unbreakable. In episode 20, Yukako visits Aya, a stand user who changes Yukako's face so that she'll be more appealing to Koichi. After failing to heed her rules, Yukako's appearance begins to degrade. Yukako is confronting Aya when Koichi shows up, and Aya gives them one last chance to restore Yukako's original appearance. Yukako must correctly identify her face from a vast array of options. This point is the creation of suspense. A challenge has been posed, and the outcome of said challenge is the moment that we're anticipating. The suspense builds when we learn that none of the faces are Yukako's. She is doomed to pick the wrong face. Once again, the key to suspense is letting the audience know more than the characters. Yukako decides to let Koichi choose, putting the pressure on him and making the tension even greater. Not yet satisfied with the stakes of the situation, Koichi then lays his own eyes on the line if he chooses incorrectly. The audience wants to scream out to tell them that they're doomed to pick incorrectly. Finally, the tension is broken as Yukako's face is revealed. Moved by the potential of their love, Aya broke her own rules and gave Yukako back her face. The cathartic release comes as Aya explains her motivations, and Koichi and Yukako are framed in a storybook fashion, holding one another's hands. As with the switchboard example that Hitchcock provided, this is a case of suspense without fear. Oddly, suspense can also be used for comic effect. The traditional use of this technique is the misunderstanding, where we watch a scene play out in which someone misunderstands the context, and this leads to a funny misinterpretation of what they're saying and/or doing. The suspense comes from anticipating the moment when the people involved realize their misunderstanding. Sitcoms like Frasier and Modern Family are great at this kind of suspense. In episode 27 and 28 of Diamond is Unbreakable, Araki uses a slightly different method of suspenseful comedy. Josuke plans to cheat against Rohan at a gambling game called CeeLo using his friend Mikitaka, an alien who shapeshifts into dice. The 4 steps of suspense remain the same. Suspense is created when Rohan agrees to a game of CeeLo and money is bet. Suspense builds as Mikitaka fails to understand how to cheat convincingly, Rohan ups the stakes by cutting off his own finger, and Kobayashi uses his lock stand to monitor the game. The highest point of suspense comes as emergency vehicle sirens approach. Mikitaka is curiously allergic to the sound of sirens, as we learned earlier, yet Rohan and Kobayashi don't know this. Once again, the suspense works because we know more than the characters. The suspense is broken when it turns out that the emergency vehicles have arrived to put out Rohan's house, which is caught on fire. This gives Josuke a reason to flee. We then get a cathartic release as Mikitaka innocently says, "You appear to be in low spirits. Was I of assistance to you?" This scenario is funny because the absurdity of the situation is juxtaposed by how seriously the characters take it. A vital development of suspense is the cliffhanger, where we create suspense, build it, and then, just before it breaks, the scene cuts. This technique can be used while swapping between 2 concurrent storylines, just before an ad break, remember when those were a thing, or at the end of an episode. The point of the cliffhanger is to use the audience's anticipation to keep them tuned in. People crave resolution. Jojo's is renowned for using this technique. In fact, it spawned one of the most popular pieces of series iconography. In episode 34 of Diamond is Unbreakable, we get a perfect example. After witnessing Kira killing people and capturing it on camera, Hayato retreats back home, scared, trying to figure out what to do with this information. Which he does in the bath, naturally. Suspense is created when, speak of the devil, Kira himself arrives, still thinly playing the part of Hayato's father. Hayato must hide the videotape to avoid giving away what he knows, and so the suspense builds as Kira gets closer and closer to him, scrubbing his back while Hayato struggles to conceal the tape. The dialogue runs alongside this, with Kira's questions attempting to trap Hayato. Kira finally resolves to kill him, but stops when Hayato turns the tables and reveals that he's currently filming them. Now Kira is trapped. How can he get out of this? And it's on this note that we cut. To be continued. What's fantastic about this cliffhanger though is how Araki resolves it. Instead of returning us to the action and showing Kira killing Hayato immediately, we instead skip ahead slightly. As this scene between Hayato's mother and Kira plays out, the audience is thinking, what happened? Did he really kill Hayato? No way. Watching how calm Kira stays throughout this scene makes it all the more eerie. And then we get the reveal of Hayato's body. And even then we're not out of the woods. Now the suspense shifts to Kira, who despite killing Hayato is still completely cornered. And even then, Araki doesn't relieve the tension. Instead, Kira is suddenly struck with the arrow, and the next thing we know, Hayato is alive again. Araki shifts us from suspense to mystery to suspense again over the course of the next 3 episodes. We don't get any relief whatsoever until Hayato manages to trick Kira into revealing his identity in front of Josuke at the start of episode 37, before transitioning us into the final battle sequence, replacing suspense with action. From this sequence, we can see how a cliffhanger can not only tempt the viewer into watching the next episode, but can also be essential for tactfully drawing out a suspense sequence that's too long for a single episode. Now, if I wanted to, I could bring up 100 different examples of suspense-filled moments in Jojo's. Seriously, the first half of Stardust Crusaders in particular is full of scary, suspenseful moments relating to the horror movie-style villains that pop up, like Ebony Devil, Yellow Temperance, Death 13, and Judgment. And that's even without mentioning that moment when Vanilla Ice is circling Polnareff, rolling closer and closer, which still makes my body tense up. My point is, Araki clearly knows what he's doing when it comes to suspense, and it all comes from that key piece of Hitchcockian wisdom. Whenever possible, the public must be informed. Before reading up on suspense, I completely devalued it. I always thought that surprising the audience with subtly foreshadowed twists was the ultimate goal. But you can't rely on a twist to carry every scene, and even with an amazing twist to end your story, you still have to get the audience there in the first place. Suspense, unlike mystery, allows you to use information to your advantage, creating moments that the audience excitedly anticipates. Coming up with unique ways of creating suspense, building suspense, and finally breaking that suspense can ensure your viewer stays on the edge of their seat while setting your story apart from the pack. Good writing, and good luck.